Well, thank you for joining me for the next half an hour or so. We're going to jump back into our teaching series on Jonah that we've been on for the last few weeks. Before we do that, I encourage you to jump on our website, myfaithchurch.org. We have a new website. It's up and running. It should be a little more current. Just kind of browse around that, take advantage of some of the resources that we've linked you to, whether that's Right Now Media or whether that's instructions of how to download your own version of the YouVersion Bible app. It comes in real handy when it comes to our teaching notes, and you can kind of get past messages and those type of thoughts. If you feel so led, you can click the donate button, or you can text a contribution to My Faith Church, all one word, 73256. As I always say, just so thankful for your continued support. It allows us to continue to do what we're doing here. And again, a bit of a reminder, this is a supplement, not a substitute. We would love to see you, obviously, in person, or if you are not around the Martinsville area, strongly encourage you to be a part of a local congregation. Get involved, participate, just don't go and sit and soak in, but make sure that you're involved in relationships and serving in your local congregation. So we're going to jump in. We've been in the book of Jonah, a very small prophetic book in the Old Testament. When I say prophetic, it's not so much about the future, but it's about a prophet, a reluctant prophet by the name of Jonah. 4 chapters long, and we've been focusing on the first chapter for the last couple of weeks. We're going to get into chapter 2 here in just a moment. A bit of a review if you're not familiar with the book of Jonah, which might be unusual because even if you don't know very much about the Bible at all, you've probably heard about the account of Jonah. God said, go to a place called Nineveh and preach a very simple message of repentance. Jonah refused because he did not like the people of Nineveh. They were Israel's enemy, and so he went in the opposite direction. And the Lord sent a storm. In the boat that he was on, he was headed for the farthest place in the Roman Empire at the time, Tarshish, which would be in modern-day Spain. God sends a storm. Eventually, the sailors figure out that Jonah is the cause of this storm, and they basically draw straws. Who did it? And Jonah keeps silent during that process, but eventually they discover that it's Jonah. God is seeking after him, and Jonah is a runner, and we've been talking about that we all run from God, but Jonah is the ultimate runner from God. And he just is refusing to obey the Lord. And so they throw him overboard. There's the fish, and we're going to get to that here this morning. And so if you look at chapter 1, which we've been on for the past few weeks, and last week I was on vacation, and there's a lot of events, obviously, that occurred over the past week, and we'll make some comments here on the situation in terms of Charlie Kirk, and I've been sort of silent on this. I'll make a few comments. It didn't take. I took a little bit of a break from social media, and yet obviously that exploded that whole situation, especially on social media. But chapter 1 is all about God's grace, isn't it? Here's Jonah. He's stubborn, he's spoiled, he's entitled, he doesn't fear God. He hears very clearly God has been good to Jonah. Prophets in the Old Testament was a privileged position. God spoke to them, gave them a message. The message was then to go to God's people. Jonah is very unique because the message is not going to God's people, it's going to God's people's enemies, the people of Nineveh, who have been a part of the Assyrian Empire that caused all kinds of trouble for God's people in the nation of Israel. But chapter 1 is all about God's grace. God could have chose someone who was a little more easy to work with, but he didn't. He sought after Jonah, even though Jonah was a runner. He was patient with Jonah. He allowed Jonah to run. He just didn't strike him dead as soon as Jonah refused. There was definitely a care for the messenger and not just the message. And so God is a personal God. He loves us individually. And he certainly loved Jonah, the reluctant prophet, the prophet who was disobedient. And chapter 1 is all about God's patience and all about God's love. Chapter 2 is all about God's discipline. And so if there's a key thought, I guess, to how chapter 1 and chapter 2, how they all fold together, because we're looking at the same God. Chapter 1, God is a God of love, and he's patient, and he's kind, and his grace is extensive, and he's long suffering. Chapter 2 is about God's discipline. We're going to find that Jonah's in the belly of a fish, and he stays there for 3 days and for 3 nights. And yet, even in God's discipline, there is love there. And we're going to see that actually here today. If you have your Bible, and there's a key thought to this whole thing, is that God's grace is generous. We see this in chapter 1. But in chapter 2, we also see that God's discipline is thorough. We know that Jesus was full of grace and he was full of truth. He was a God of mercy, and he is also a God of justice. And yet, oftentimes, we think that these two concepts conflict. They do not. Sometimes it feels as it does because there's tension there. We feel if we pull on the grace side, then we are subtracting from the justice side or the discipline side. If we pull on the truth side or we pull on the discipline side, we're subtracting from the grace and mercy side. And yet there is a tension there, and yet tension is good. We know that with musical instruments, for example, that acoustic guitars or guitar strings or drum heads or even pianos, that there is a tension with those strings, with the skins on the drum to make a particular sound. Without that tension, there can be no music. When it comes to the discipline and the justice and the grace and the mercy of God, there exists this tension. But without the other, then it's not complete. We don't have a complete picture of who God is. So as we look at the book of Jonah, chapter 1 and chapter 2, it gives us a complete view of who God is. God is a God of mercy and grace. He is also God of truth and discipline and justice in chapter 2. Chapter 1 ends with this verse. It says, "Now the Lord had prepared a great fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights." There was a rescue there. And God is, again, a God of grace. Jonah wanted to die. Just throw me overboard instead of turning the boat around and I'll go to Nineveh. No, just throw me overboard. He's stubborn. He would rather have died than to do what the Lord had desired him to do. And so here we have God again provides a rescue. He provides a fish to swallow Jonah. Chapter 2 begins with this interesting verse. "After the fish swallowed Jonah, then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the belly of the fish." And I have in my notes here, and you would too. When it comes to discipline, that is when we see Jonah starting to pray. We don't see Jonah praying in chapter 1. We see him running. We see him going in the opposite direction and doing the things opposite of God and wanting to get away and wanting nothing to do with God. There was no acknowledgement of prayer and communion and connection with the Lord. But discipline, we see that Jonah's changing his tune. Then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the belly of the fish. And all of chapter 2 is this prayer that we have of Jonah in the belly of that fish as he's in the process of being disciplined. Last week, obviously, and I was on vacation taking a bit of a break from social media, the whole Charlie Kirk situation occurred. And there's several angles to look at this. Outrage, sadness, obviously. I found myself as I was looking at Jonah chapter 2 and looking at Jonah's discipline in the belly of the fish. I thought about the father and mother of the assassin. From what I know, and I could be wrong, he seemed to come from a stable home. Definitely, there was a respect for authority and law. His father was in law enforcement. There seemed to be an element of him being raised correctly. And yet, a withdrawal from those values, a withdrawal from those morals and those principles and going in the opposite direction. I found myself thinking about the parents of the assassin and wondering I'm sure they're devastated of what he did, and also what their child is going to face and the consequences. I was thinking about a conversation as well that I had a month ago with somebody that was disciplining one of their children. Their child was kind of around the tween age, 10, 11, 12, around there. And how they had done something and they were being grounded, things were being taken away. They had things that they had to do, little chores, extra chores to punish them and discipline them for what they were caught doing. I was talking to this individual, and they saying, we're on the third week, of this discipline, and it just doesn't seem that their child was quite getting, that discipline. They were just kind of watching the clock. They knew that the discipline had a shelf life and it was going to come to an end. And as I was talking to this parent, my great piece of advice was this. This is why I get paid the big bucks. I said, well, just hang in there. I mean, that was my advice, right? There's a verse in Hebrews chapter 12 that talks about godly discipline, and that a loving father disciplines their children. There is a perspective as people and as children, because we were all children at one time, that we have of discipline when we were being disciplined versus now, versus how that discipline over time has, there's a change of perspective. And the author of Hebrews says it this way in verse 11 of chapter 12. No discipline seems pleasant at the time. And as you would think of Jonah, here is his response. I've had it. I get the point. You can take me out of this situation anytime. And yet God allowed Jonah to be there for 3 days and 3 nights. I would imagine Jonah, as soon as he was swallowed from the fish, he was probably saying to himself, okay, God, I get it. This is too extensive. This is too extreme. And when it comes to our discipline that we experience in our childhood or even now from the Lord, no discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. But later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. I think of some of the ways and things as I was a child, I was disciplined. I never thought that it was appropriate. At the time, my parents were always too extreme. The discipline was always too long. Now, a child of my own, now a little older and wiser, a little grayer, a little heavier. I look back on that moment with a different attitude, thankful for the discipline. May not have gotten it at the time, but now I do. And so my advice maybe was appropriate to this person that I was talking to about a month ago. Hang in there. Definitely something to consider as we look at Jonah here in chapter 2. So chapter 2 is all about God's discipline. Here are some thoughts from chapter 2 as we look at this prayer of Jonah. It's very revealing. There's a process that God is doing as Jonah is in the midst of this discipline from a loving God. And number one is this: Jonah chose to run, but God chose when and where and how Jonah was going to stop. We've talked about and commented several times over the past few weeks about how we are all runners. All we like sheep have gone astray. Each of us have gone to our own way. Jonah was the ultimate runner. He was the competitive runner. Some of us run more casually, but Jonah was definitely defiant in his running. He chose when, where, and how. As soon as he heard that God wanted him to do this, he said no. Didn't think about it, didn't contemplate it, certainly didn't pray about it. His time was, I'm going to choose now my time to run. He chose when, he chose where. He was going to go to Tarshish. He's going to go as far away as he possibly could. He chose how. He was going to board a boat. And God will allow you to choose to run. You can choose when, where, and how you are going to run. Those things will be harmful and destructive in your life, but he will allow you to choose to do those things. But all runners eventually get tired, and all runners eventually their run comes to an end. And very rarely, when we run, do we choose when to stop. God usually chooses when it comes to stopping. Usually through consequences, we are forced. And I hear people in my office when they've been running from the Lord and consequences have come to bear. I'll hear statements like, "This is the worst time that this could have happened," or "This is the worst possible thing that could have occurred in my life," and why now? All these questions come about. And when you're disciplined from the Lord and when you've been running from the Lord, you get to choose when, how, and where, how to run. But when consequences come to bear, as we see in Jonah's life, it was God that said, okay, now your time of running is coming to completion. I think of the Old Testament father, not Abraham, but his grandson, a guy by the name of Jacob. Jacob was a runner as well, if you're familiar with his story in the book of Genesis. His name means tripper or heel grabber. It also means deceiver. It also means slippery one. And Jacob was he was a bit of a scoundrel. He believed in the Lord, and yet he wasn't very good at following the Lord. He thought the Lord needed a little help in terms of his life. And so Jacob was an intelligent man. He knew how to push buttons with people and how to manipulate circumstances and situations in order for his own benefit. He knew what buttons to push in terms of his brother Esau, what was his areas of vulnerability, gave him a bowl of stew in exchange for his birthright. He deceived his blind father, dressing up like his brother to receive a blessing of inheritance. Eventually he left and he went to his uncle's house, Laban, and he continued in his ways. And so we see that there are just parts of Jacob's story where God just seems to corner him a bit in order to get a hold of him for him to stop running. But God allows the squirmer, the slippery one, to sort of just slip out of these situations for a number of years, all until he gets to a place at the Jabbok River and he wrestles with God. He actually wrestles with the angel of the Lord, which is an Old Testament reference to Jesus. It's called a Christophany. Then, with all of his possessions and all of his relationships, all the people in his life, his wives and his children, and everything that he valued, on the other side of the Jabbok River, we find that Jacob is alone. And all night he wrestled with Jesus. He had his Jesus moment. And at that point, God said, "You're not going to wiggle away. We're going to have it out." And Jacob was crying at the beginning of this, let me go. And God said, "No, it's time for you to stop running." And at the end of that whole wrestling episode, all night it occurred, it was Jacob who said, I'm not letting you go. And his name was changed from Jacob to Israel. We know that Israel is the Israelites, and that means people who wrestle with God. All runners eventually will be called to stop, usually when circumstances come to a head. And we are called to wrestle with the Lord. And we see that Jonah is wrestling here with God in chapter 2. You can run, but you're also going to have to come to a stop, and you're going to have to wrestle. And we see this in Jonah's life. Here's our second observation. Jonah blamed God for his situation, but God was consistent in his discipline. Just as I was mentioning before, as I was talking to that person, as their child was in this process of discipline and they didn't think that they were quite getting the message, because obviously the goal is you want your child to have empathy and understand why they're being disciplined and agree. It's not just about behavior modification, it's about heart transformation, and that's what we want to see in our discipline. But we see in Jonah's prayer, well, let me just read it here, he's not quite getting it. Verse 2 says, verse 1 says, then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the belly of the fish, and he said, I cried out to the Lord because of my affliction. His affliction has brought him to his knees. That's often the case, right? And he answered me, out of the belly of Sheol I cried, and you heard my voice. For you cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas, and the floods surrounded me. All of your billows and your waves passed over me. Then I said, I have been cast out from your sight, yet I will yet look again toward your temple. The water surrounded me, even to my soul. The deep closed around me. Weeds were wrapped around my head. That's verse 5 right there. So you get the picture here that Jonah's suffering. He is being disciplined. It has brought him to his knees to cry out to the Lord, but he is still stubborn. He's still playing the victim here. It reminds me of many of the Psalms, as we see that as a person goes and they're writing the Psalm, at the beginning of the Psalm, it's all about them. Woe is me, I've gotten myself to this, or I'm in this situation, and God, where is your justice? Where's your mercy? Where is your righteousness? And then toward the end of the Psalm, we start to see more of a coming around to a correct perspective. We certainly see this with Jonah as well. So in the midst of discipline, there's a process here. We see that Jonah he's running from the Lord. The Lord has called him to stop. He's in the midst of discipline. Do not be discouraged with your own children when you discipline them and they don't quite seem to get it right away. Discipline, there's a process here in discipline. God was consistent. Even though he sees and he hears, he's patient, he's kind. There is kindness and grace being extended to Jonah, even in the form of his discipline, but also in God's listening. God's listening to the rant. And in verse 6, we have a bit of a breakthrough. This is what Jonah says. I went down to the moorings of the mountains. The earth with its bars closed behind me forever. Yet you have brought me up my life from the pit, O Lord, my God. So at least at this point, Jonah, remember, he just wanted to go overboard and die. Now he's saying, you know what? God, yes, this is your fault. He's blaming you. He's playing the victim. He's doing all these things because Jonah has a long way to go. But here in verse 6, he at least comes to the place where he says, yet though, Lord, you didn't kill me. You did save me. My life has been spared. So discipline is beginning to start the process of heart transformation, not just behavior modification. Here's our third observation. Jonah prayed to God for deliverance, and God was gracious in his response. Let me start here in verse 7. When my soul fainted within me, I remembered the Lord. You see, discipline has a process. God knew exactly how long Jonah needed to be in that belly of the fish. Not too long to where it was cruel, not too short to where it wasn't complete. When my soul fainted within me, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer went up to you into your holy temple. Those who regard worthless idols forsake their own mercy. Now, here we have in verse 7, Jonah is confessing that he has come to an end of himself. I've wrestled, I've squirmed enough, I've thrown out as much blame as I possibly can, but I've come to this point, the end. I'm tired, I'm exhausted, I'm giving up. My soul fainted within me. Lord, you are right. You are the Lord. My prayer is going up to you. You did save my life into your holy temple. Those who regard worthless idols forsake their own mercy. There's a lot of debate of what verse 8 says. Is Jonah referring to himself as he is the one who has had a worthless idol of revenge and bitterness and anger and unforgiveness toward the people of Nineveh? Or is he saying the people of Nineveh, those worthless idols that they hold on to and they don't deserve, they forsake their own mercy? I think it's a little bit of both. Some people will say, no, this is Jonah talking about himself. Some people will say, no, that doesn't fit the context of Jonah's prayer. He is saying, yes, I'll go and I'll do this. I'll send a message of mercy and repentance to Nineveh, but they're holding on to worthless idols. They don't deserve their mercy, but I will go ahead and do it. I think there's a little bit of both here. We still see some Jonah here, don't we? Yes, God, we all deserve your wrath. We all deserve your discipline. I do. I was disobedient. So do the people of Nineveh. We're all holding our worthless idols. And when we do, we forsake our own mercy. God, I will do and send and be a messenger of your grace and your justice and your mercy. But there's still this aspect of Jonah that's holding on here. Reminds me a lot of Samson. Samson was a runner as well. You can read a story about Samson in the book of Judges. He's a guy who is selected by God, empowered by God, gifted by God to punish the Philistines, right? And it's an extreme time, an extreme man was needed. And yet most of Samson's life, he just operated with this sense of, I'm going to do what I want. And I'm strong enough, nobody can tell me any different. And yet Samson was controlled by his thirst for revenge, his appetites, his lusts. And eventually it got him to a place where he stopped running, right? All runners eventually will stop. The hair was cut. He lost his strength. The eyes were gouged out by the Philistines. They put him in a temple of a false god, grinding on a grinding wheel. Samson had given up his calling for the one true and only God. And here he's serving a false god, grinding grain that would be used for bread and festivals and worship services toward a false god. His eyes have been gouged. He's blind, he's bound, and he's grinding. It's about as low as you possibly can go. And yet he was taken out from that. He's put between two pillars, if you're familiar with the story of Samson. And he's there to be mocked by his enemies, by the Philistines. Look at who you are now, Samson. Look at your God. And Samson prays to the Lord, a very similar prayer that we see with Jonah. He's come to an end of himself where he says, "O sovereign Lord, strengthen me one last time." And at that time, I believe that there was a submission to, okay, God, you're in charge. You're in charge. I've been operating, Samson, here he is. He's been operating his whole life as if he's in charge. And, God, I'm going to show you that you can't control me. And yet Samson was controlled by all these other things. And it got to a place in his life where he's blind, he's bound, and he's on a grinding wheel. He's just walking around in circles, a wasted life. And here he has one more opportunity. And he says this, "O sovereign Lord, strengthen me one last time. Use me, Lord, you're in charge." And then he says this, "Let me get revenge on the Philistines for my eyes." You see, this concept of discipline and grace, there's a process there. You are not a completed work. When you finally fall on your knees and you say, "Okay, sovereign Lord, you are in charge," you get all of God. You get all of his strength. You get all of his mercy. You get all of his justice that's applied to Jesus. You receive all of the Holy Spirit. But you also have to grow in the grace that is extended to you. We call that sanctification. You receive all of God, but it takes a lot of time for God to receive all of you. And so here we have Jonah's situation as we have Samson's situation. Even in the discipline, we see God extending mercy to a couple of people that didn't quite get it quite yet. And I think about our own salvation. If you have placed your faith and trust in Christ, you know this. You received grace, but you also know this. You'd have to admit this. I know I do. I didn't quite realize how lost I really was. And the more that I grow in this understanding of God's grace that he has given me in my life, it's not that I think, "Oh, look how far I've come. Look how good I've become." It's more of, look how lost I really was. And we see this here with Jonah. He has at least come to a place where he's saying, "Okay, sovereign Lord, you're in charge." But there's still a lot of Jonah. And that was the problem, because after he got out of discipline, he didn't allow that grace to grow in his life. We'll get to that in the weeks to come. But here's our final observation. Jonah submitted to God's will, and his conduct was in line with Jonah's attitude. Here's how the end of this prayer comes. "But I will sacrifice to you with the voice of thanksgiving." I've come to this point. God, you're in charge. I will sacrifice to you with the voice of thanksgiving because I know that my discipline will come to an end. I will pay what I have vowed. I'm vowing to obey. Salvation is of the Lord. Lord, you are in charge. You distribute your mercy and your justice to whom you choose. I don't get to say. And then verse 10, so the Lord spoke to the fish and vomited Jonah onto dry ground. We get to the point where Jonah says, all right, I will obey what I have vowed. Discipline has done its work here. Sure, Jonah pouted later on. Jonah sulked. Jonah was very difficult to deal with after Nineveh repented. Jonah did not allow that grace that began here in discipline in the belly of his fish. He did not allow that to grow in his life. He stifled it, because oftentimes once you get out of discipline, if you don't continue to grow, you'll just kind of go back to your own ways. But what we do see happen here is that Jonah never ran again. We know this. The Lord bless you, the Lord keep you. There's so much more here that we have to talk about in the book of Jonah. I think we can see ourselves kind of in the mirror as we look at Jonah, applying these things to our life. Thank you for the Lord's discipline. He is rich in mercy and grace, but he's also thorough in his discipline. We need to grow in that. We need to accept that. We need to embrace that. We see God in chapter 1, he's a God of mercy and love, but we also see in chapter 2, God is a God of mercy and love in his discipline as well. We see this with Jonah. The Lord bless you and keep you. May his face shine upon you and give you strength until we meet again. God bless.